Hi, this is Rich Myers, host of the Voices from the Field podcast. We have a special episode for you today, a look back at some highlights from the podcast during 2022. It was a great year for Voices from the Field, with 50 interesting conversations and loads of practical information running the gamut of sustainable agriculture topics. We're honored that Voices from the Field has become a trusted source of information about sustainable agriculture and renewable energy since it began more than 5 years ago, with thousands of subscribers adding it to their weekly downloads. So, as we dig into the new year, here's a look back at some of the episodes that were favorites of listeners and NCAT staff in 2022. Let's listen. First up is a conversation between two NCAT sustainable agriculture specialists, Felicia and Justin Duncan. In episodes 258 and 259, Everything Old is New Again, exploring indigenous and traditional agriculture methods. Felicia and Justin grew up in families that taught their younger generations traditional practices for growing crops, raising livestock, and harvesting what the land naturally provides. Felicia and Justin see many people who are learning to farm turning to practices that parallel those traditional methods.
The past couple of years, we've gone through the pandemic or whatever, and you saw an explosion of people trying to get back to the land, people trying to grow something, even if it was on their balcony or their back porch or their backyard or front yard or wherever. People were trying to grow stuff. A lot of them ran into a problem that they didn't know how to grow stuff. And so, I got lots of calls or messages or emails or taps on the shoulder, whatever you want to call them. Folks wanted to know, how is it that you grow this particular thing? How do you grow corn? How do you grow tomatoes, sweet potatoes, all this stuff? So I think the question is an important one because, so many people are into it now. And, as with anything, a lot of people start off and then you've got some people who fall off the map with it and some people who join late and all that sort of stuff. So it's still pretty relevant. They want to know how to grow it, but I'm going to tell them the best way to do it coming from a natural perspective. Like what is the best thing from the plant's point of view? I'm all about the plants, the plant health. So yeah, and then I always look to my big mama. So when you say
Yes.
you say indigenous and all our old ways of doing things, the only thing that comes to my mind is Big Mama because she's
Yes.
103. She raised like 7 children during the Depression on an acre of land. She kept the family fed.
Wow.
And I would spend summers with her and she would tell me stories of, how they prepared the land. And I mean, it was somewhat violent because they would go through with a chain. They would take 2 tractors and put a really, really heavy chain between them, and they would pull the chain across the field, and that would pretty much clear everything out of the way. And then she would prepare it, and she would can with my great aunts, and she would prepare a lot of food. Even when I was young, she always had like cabinets full of preserved food from her plums or figs, all that sort of thing. And then she always raised chickens. And my other great grandmother who lived down the street from her, she also raised chickens. And that's the other side of this is that people, they're not only growing their own vegetables, they're growing livestock now.
Yes.
And so many people getting into chickens or sheep or goats or pigs or cattle or whatever. People are, embracing this I've got to be independent attitude.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Now, what I'm noticing as well, I definitely could piggyback on what you said, is the newfound landowners. I definitely, a lot have been coming to the forefront in these last 2 years, but are they specifically asking you indigenous ways, traditional ways, or are they just coming and like, hey, I bought land, I don't know how to grow anything?
So for the most part, people are looking for, they've got land or they want land or they've got a container or whatever. They're not really so much, specifically asking for the indigenous ways. It's just that the indigenous ways happen to be the best way of doing things.
Now, I feel like it's probably because it's easier to implement. What's your thoughts on that? Like you and I are only going to promote that because of, again, the way we were raised. But like, again, I'm feeling like it's easier to implement for a new and beginning farmer and someone that's green and don't know anything. What's your thoughts on that?
That's actually pretty true. I mean, because the older ways they're less complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to sit up there and calculate anything. You don't really have to, well, except for, what your probable yields are. You want to know things like that.
Yeah.
As far as, nozzle calibration, all that craziness, you don't have to worry about any of that. You put some compost down, you put some manure down, you plant your seeds, a lot of people are embracing the three sisters. That's,
yeah.
Or four sisters, if they include the sunflowers,
mm-hmm.
the indigenous systems. And it's indigenous to the Americas. But when you get, folks that are descended from Africans, they had their own systems over there.
Mm-hmm.
They pretty much mirrored what the Native Americans were doing. So you had African multi-crop systems, and you had Native American multi-crop systems. In Africa, they would use yams, the true yams, the Dioscorea yams, not the sweet potatoes. And these things, they grew up poles. And those things grew up, either poles that they made or plants or trees that the yam vines could grow up. And then on the ground, they have melons.
Mm-hmm.
Melons are from Africa. The watermelons, the what is that? The Agusi melons.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
They were growing these things, and they were
okay.
they serve the same purpose as the squash in the American system. The yams, they serve the purpose of the beans, not so much for the soil enrichment, because they had cowpeas for that, which are the African equivalent to the Phaseolus type beans that we've got over the Americas. But the yams would climb up the poles. So you have all these parallels, and like understands like.
Mm-hmm.
So this makes sense to you if you come into that system. And so African Americans, when they ran off and went to live with the Native Americans, they adopted those systems too, because it was something that made easy sense to them. Now in modern times, folks are like, I want to use the three sisters.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes sense. But since we're talking about old ways and livestock and all that, did your people have a smokehouse?
We did. Yep, we had a smokehouse. I learned how to do jerky and that type of dealing with meat. Now, when I came along, I was the person that got the hides off, got the skins off, the hides and so forth. That was my job. I loved it, and it's quick with precision. It's like you gotta be precise, because we sold our hides as well. That was our school money and so forth, to buy school supplies and stuff like that. But you have to be precise. If you nicked a hide, you couldn't sell it. But then you had to get as much skin, fats, that kind of stuff off of the hide. Yes, I know how to salt hides and stretch hides and all of that kind of stuff. But that, along with the smoking of meat, yes. And then we did have a smokehouse, but I learned from, is it the Inuits, like the Alaskan people, we could utilize a tent method especially because they have to do it when they're hunting moose and stuff like that. They can't, they got to go on and harvest the animal, because then, predators will start following them as they're hunting and so forth. So they go on and dress an animal like quick. And I'm like, they're fast. They're really fast on how they can dress an animal and have smoked dried meat like overnight. And I'm like, it's amazing. And all they do is tarping. They're tarping with branches from, from the woods that they're in, and they're able to smoke meat. And I was like, I like that way better. And the reason why is not having to build a building, building an actual, because our grandparents had actual smokehouse buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that's just so interesting. Now they put this permaculture label on it. It's not permaculture. It's just, the way that folks did stuff.
But she did it before we existed. See,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? They did these things, and then we were fortunate enough to be born during the time to see it.
Yes. But this was all set up long, long ago.
Yes, but they knew it, and that's what I would hope that our audience can understand, that is not about trying to take away from. We're trying to share that these methodologies have been around for thousands and thousands of years. They've been handed down. Our grandparents wouldn't have known this if it hadn't been handed down, just like it was handed down to us. So it's not trying to take away from, but we have to make sure that people know it existed. It's nothing new under the sun, which it never is. These ideas have always been here, but you're going to have different cultures tweak it, change it up to work for them where they are. And so we just want to make sure that the methodologies that we utilize on a daily basis are known, they're viable, and they've been proven, because we're talking about thousands of years.
NCAT Director of Communications and Development, Emily Ritter, and NCAT Community Food Systems Specialist, Maura Henn, talk about the sometimes unexpected impact of farmers markets in episode 267, How Farmers Markets Do More Than Sell Local Goods. In 2022, NCAT released a study exploring the effect farmers markets have on Montana's economy and launched Montana Farmers Market Network, a website to connect markets, farmers, and communities. Emily and Maura talk about the website, the results of the study, and the important role farmers markets can play, especially in smaller communities.
Maura's work is focused on connecting Montana farmers market managers with tools and resources that they need to build these community gathering places. And thanks so much for being here today, Maura.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
When I think of my own local farmers market, I'm thinking of all the fresh fruits and the veggies that I wait all winter long for and can only get one time of year. I think about how my local farmers market's a place where, the farmers and the makers and the artisans and the coffee shops and musicians gather to create this really beautiful community resource. And then I also think of farmers markets as a destination. And I wonder, how do you think of your local farmers market and its importance within creating community?
I see farmers markets very similarly as a destination, as a community gathering space. So that definitely resonates with me. But also through my work at NCAT, I've come to see farmers markets as essential businesses that help improve food access and combat food insecurity. So through some of my work at NCAT, my local farmers market here is the Butte Farmers Market, and they are an authorized SNAP retailer, so SNAP Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. And they also participate in the Double SNAP Dollars program, which is a SNAP match program that is available to markets in Montana. And our Butte market sees very high redemption rates in both of those programs. And especially during the pandemic, we saw a real increase in people using SNAP benefits at the farmers market. And, that was so interesting to see and really heartening, because the markets are a place for people to have access to healthy and nutrient-dense food. And especially during a pandemic, it's so important that people are taking care of themselves and are eating nutritiously. So that's been definitely a shift from how I previously looked at farmers markets. And then I also see farmers markets as small business incubators for all types of vendors. They're really easy access points for up and coming producers, bakers, cottage food producers. It's a way that they can build loyal customer bases and maybe even eventually branch out into more mainstream markets, like a local grocery store.
That makes so much sense to me, because what better way to sort of get feedback on your product than being, face to face with your customer, and they can tell you what they think of your logo or your packaging or whatever it is. So, maybe it seems a little obvious that farmers markets can help, directly connect producers with consumers and get that real-time feedback. I wonder what the lasting impact of that kind of connection can be. And what's the real impact of being able to sell locally, to sell to your neighbor?
Mm-hmm. No, there are a lot of local impacts. So according to the USDA, direct marketing farmers, so folks who are at farmers markets or farm stands or even CSAs, community supported agriculture, those farmers experience lower rates of farm business failure or bankruptcy than growers who sell exclusively wholesale. And farmers who sell locally are more likely to keep farming. And it really stimulates the local economy. So also according to the USDA, growers who are selling locally create 13 full-time operator jobs or full-time farm operator jobs per $1 million in revenue that is earned. And those who do not sell locally only create 3. And then according to a USDA survey, approximately 78% of farmers markets directly selling to customers sold all of their directly marketed food within a 100-mile radius of the farm. So that to me means that those customers are, they're reaching those customers within a 100-mile radius. Those customers are investing their dollars into their local economy, and those farmers are like recirculating that, keeping it closer, that there's less gas that goes into shipping when we're buying and selling locally. It really builds up our local systems. And again, we saw that in the pandemic with food supply chains breaking down. And that was another reason why people who maybe weren't on SNAP went to farmers markets as well, because it's like they needed groceries and they were able to go to the market. So yeah, there's definitely an impact in selling locally.
And I think too, just about the way I use farmers markets locally, you start to know your vendors and you start to know the farmers, and you go back to the same farm stand every year. You know who has the best whatever that you're looking for. And I'd imagine that has a lasting impact too, to sort of create those relationships with the farmer and the consumer.
I definitely think so. I think that in a way, it creates kind of a feeling of ownership on the customer side, like a personal investment. I know I personally feel so personally happy when I see a vendor start at a farmer's market and then move into a brick and mortar store that's like more fully supporting our community. I've seen that happen here in Butte. I've seen it happen in other cities I've lived in with farmers markets. And it makes a person feel like you personally had an impact in that expansion, which I don't know. I find that to feel really good.
Yeah, you have a stake in having their business succeed because you want to keep buying their product. You don't want to see them go away.
Mm-hmm.
So NCAT recently partnered with the University of Montana's Bureau of Business and Economic Research to better understand the impacts of farmers markets here in Montana. And earlier, you shared with all of our listeners some of the national impacts and things we know to be true through USDA. I'm curious what you learned from the University of Montana's study and sort of what surprised you about those results.
Right. So there was a lot of information that was shared in that study, but some of the highlights and what surprised me was, aside from the $17.3 million in revenue that was generated by markets in 2021, which is just so impressive, and really a goal of this study was to have a baseline understanding of the economic impact of markets. I was really surprised to learn how many people are working to support farmers markets. In 2021, 4,900 people work to produce and sell the goods and services offered on a typical market day. So that is anybody who worked. That's paid and unpaid. So that may be, family members of a vendor who are helping to get to market, who don't necessarily receive income. But that's also, maybe you have farm help on your farm and they don't necessarily go to market, but they help you pack things to get there. And as of 2021, we had 71 markets in the state. And it's just, I don't know, it's just amazing to me that for every market, there's multiple markets a week. There's on average that many people working to get those market days going. And then in addition to that, there were 260 full-time Montana jobs that are supported by farmers markets over that 4,900. So those are farmers market managers, program staff. And we're a big state. We don't have the biggest population in the country. To me, 260 full-time jobs supported by farmers markets was really surprising and really exciting to me.
Yeah. And so it's more than 5,000 jobs in total and close to $20 million for a state the size of Montana, which it's a big deal. So Mara's been working away at developing a new website specifically for Montana farmers market managers and vendors. It's farmersmarketmt.com. And what do you think this resource will really provide to both farmers and market managers and vendors? How do you think it'll help strengthen markets here in Montana?
Well, we really wanted this site to be a sort of a one-stop shop for all things farmers markets in Montana. So for those who are looking to start a market in their community, to more established markets looking to expand community partnerships or to start food access programs like SNAP and Double SNAP dollars, we have resources for all sorts of those things on the website. And in addition to those resources, there are also links to national resources or best practices from other markets or network associations around the country. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. There are some really amazing things happening in other markets around the country. And so we wanted to be able to provide that all in one spot for people to look for. But it's also a place where you can request assistance from us at NCAT, or we can also connect you with our partners around the state who are working in specific areas. So if there's a question that you have, it's a way to, you can send us an email directly and we'll get back to you. So many of us have either worked for farmers markets or are vendors and producers on the side. So we have real world knowledge on the ground experience that we can help draw from. And then if we don't have an answer, we can also reach out to that wider network and help you with that. I guess my personal goal with the site was, having something that was just really easy to find, that wasn't maybe nested somewhere else in another partner website, and something that our Montana Farmers Market Network, which is what we call kind of our loosely associated group of markets that include all of the markets in the state, something that they could really have ownership of and provide feedback on.
In episode 271, farmer veteran finds passion in horticulture therapy. NCAT's ATRA program director, Margot Hale, talks with Charlie Jordan, a military veteran and flower farmer in Tennessee. Charlie describes his lifelong interest in farming and ranching and the sometimes circuitous path that eventually led him to start his flower operation. Charlie also shares what has become a passion for horticulture therapy and using agriculture as a tool to help others heal.
And I was like, well, I want to try something different. So I started reading up on horticulture stuff. I really wasn't into it. And let me try something. So I wanted to be the tomato baron of Middle Tennessee. So that's what I was going to be. So I started studying and looking into, tomatoes and different types and all the varieties and cultivar, everything that was out there. So I decided to go with this variety called Mortgage Lifter. The name kind of sounded cool. The history behind it was, the guy who invented it, produced them, had enough money with him to pay off his mortgage, and that's where the name came from. And then I started growing. I grew, I think it was 140, I believe, that I got. So I set out a plot in my tomatoes, and it was within 3-4 weeks, they were all dead except for about 2. I learned real quick about, what to do with soil and soil amendments and how to get your soil ready and prepared, and which cultivars would really do well in Middle Tennessee, and the nasty little thing called a tomato worm.
Yeah.
Me and that thing went, had some time. We did. But then I noticed that there was something that survived, and it was my companion flowers that I planted with them. And I just said, wow, these things are, they're surviving. They're, it's 100 degrees out here, and I have them, there's no water, and these things are thriving. And I didn't sell any bouquets. I just enjoyed them. And I was like, well, let me study up a little bit on floriculture. So I did. I devoted an entire winter to learning about floriculture and all the parts and pieces of floriculture and the marketing and everything about it.
The ATRA website has been connecting sustainable agriculture students and farmers around the country for decades. Our free internship hub makes it easy to find interns or farmers looking to hire interns. If you're looking for some practical experience on a working farm to bolster your studies, or you want to pass on the wisdom of your experience in exchange for some willing elbow grease, stop by at atra.ncat.org.
And then in 2018, after I retired in 2018, I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and try flowers. So I tried about 3 rows of flowers, and I said, well, maybe I can sell these. So I started making bouquets. I learned how to make bouquets through YouTube and on the internet. And my specialty is the spiral bouquet is what I make. And I just picked it up and I started making them, and people liked them. And they started, coming out to the farm. They wanted to buy these little bouquets I had. And I'm like, this is kind of cool. So I found a little local market, a store that allowed me to put some bouquets in it. And these things were selling out really quick. And I was like, well, maybe I'm onto something here. So then 2019 came, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna try a little bit bigger operation. So I expanded it out from 3 rows to about 5. Not a real big expansion, but and then I decided to go back to the Clarksville downtown market. I had been a vendor there before with my beef operation, so I decided to return with flowers. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. People were just in love with these things. And my first market, I'll never forget it, I sold out within 30 minutes.
Wow.
I learned that, one, I didn't cut enough flowers and didn't have enough flowers. And 2 is that people really love these things, and they like the happiness of it and getting bouquets. So it's kind of how it started all out. And then the pandemic came, and, I really thought, I was going to have a rough time. I thought, this is going to be tough. I don't know how the market's going to go. And I had went ahead and expanded even larger. And I expanded out to, there were like 8 rows is what I went to. I set them up in a kind of an agritourism kind of photography setup, which I had learned through a couple of different sources. And I planted really a lot of flowers. There were tons that year. And this was 2020, pandemic started, and we had our market, and I brought the flowers there, and people were they wanted to smile.
Yeah.
They wanted something to make them happy during that terrible time. And I was like, wow, I started selling out every weekend within an hour. Hour and a half, I was selling, over, 40 to 50 bouquets. And my bouquets are all handmade right there in front of you. I don't have any pre-made bouquets. And that was my first year of agriculture that I actually made a profit. After, starting in 2001, it took me, almost 19 years to get a profit. And that was okay. I was okay with that. And, with agriculture itself, I found, that it gave me solace. It gave me my ability to cope with everything in the world. The military is a hard place to be. And I spent my career and life in there. I was an institutional man. This is all I ever knew was 3 meals a day and hood and salute and go where they told me to go, kill bad people. That was what I did. and I absolutely loved it. But when I left the military, I found that I was missing that a lot, and I needed something to help me cope with that. And I found agriculture to be my little safe place. I found agriculture that was somebody that would listen to me. I found agriculture that was a person that gave no judgment on either my operation was a success or it was a failure. It was still just agriculture. And I quickly found that it was up to me. I had to, come out of my darkest place, and I had to, be the small business owner that I knew I could be. I am a 100% vetrepreneur. I believe in vegetrepreneurship, and the farm and everything about it gave me that peace. And it's now this year it's been absolutely incredible. It really has.
That's awesome. Well, you're talking about how agriculture and your farm has brought you so much solace and healing, and it's been such an important part of your life for the last 20 years or so. And I know that recently you've been exploring a new path related to that and received some training in horticulture therapy. And so I would love to hear about that. I think that is a really interesting topic, and I hear like twinges of people kind of talking about this all the time. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that is, what your training was, and what you plan to do with that.
Right. I found horticulture therapy kind of by accident. I actually started just doing some research on some type of mental health therapy that I could use agriculture as part of, because I had already been doing it anyway. I've been doing briefings on Fort Campbell a lot. I've been doing presentations at different conferences, and Pick Tennessee conference. I know that I met you first time was at one of the SOG conference, and all these wonderful things. And I was like, there's got to be something out there that is part of therapy, mental health improvement, and using plants and animals and everything. And bam, I found it. It was horticulture therapy, and it came up my first search on a search engine, and there it was. I was like, holy moly, there is something out there like that. And so I started looking and researching into it. Spent about 2 years really researching into it and seeing all about it. And then I was kind of trying to find some programs out there that actually did it. And then I participated. I remember back in about 2014, I participated in a program with my future teacher in the HT program, and he came to Clarksville, Tennessee, and we did a horticulture therapy activity. And I was like, this is really cool. And then, lo and behold, Dr. Derek Stowell from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, he developed this program. It's a 7-month program, it's horticulture therapy program. And it was the most amazing thing I think I've done in many, many years. It was 7 months of therapy for me. It was amazing. We learned a lot, thinking about horticulture therapy itself. The horticulture part was actually kind of a side item for the course. We learned more about the therapeutic side, integrated and complementary care, and how to integrate horticulture therapy into programs, and how to start your own programs and how to run them. And that, and that this is nothing new. It was actually, there's actually evidence-based theory that was actually established by Benjamin Rush back in the 1700s. He was actually called the father of modern psychology, and he was one of the original signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he saw through how plants were able to heal people who were having mental illness. And back then it was called different things, but I grabbed onto it. And I started really reading into it. And once I had the ability to go to this course and learn all these different parts and pieces of it, I was like, yeah, this is my jam. This is really cool. And being able to integrate it into what I'm doing already has been fantastic. So I do, right now I'm doing some pro bono stuff. I'm trying to get my name out there as far as horticulture therapy part. People know me as far as the flower dude, but I'm trying to get out more as a HT professional. So I'm on a board with the Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Treatment Clinic here in Clarksville, Tennessee, and a couple other boards. But this one is really cool. I'm able to use their community room and be able to be on their schedule for community room events using HT horticulture therapy programming. I've already done 2 projects with them. Did a bouquet building class. We've done gourd painting. The next one I have coming up actually this month, towards the end of the month, is going to be a herb drying class and how to make your own herb drying rack. Then we have one in October, a program that's going to be how to make your own pumpkin vase. For dried flowers and stuff, and also for Halloween. So those are some of the things that I've been doing. Then I do stuff out here at the farm. When people come out and visit the farm, I'm able to, to work. They come out here and do pick your own flowers and stuff, but we also do walks. We do talks. I tell them about the flowers. I show them about how the bouquet is built and how it works. And I get the smile on their face, and they say how wonderful it was and how soothing and calming it is. And that's my goal, is to be able to provide a different type of care than your standard, mental health facilities. There's this, of course, a stigma attached to mental health care, and a lot with the male population, and especially veterans, with that proud veteran self, and don't want to admit, that you might have a problem, might have just a small weakness, a small, little dent in your shield, that, but it's all good. It's okay. I'm a proud, member of my local mental health community. I still do my therapy as much as I can. I still take my meds. I still have, the nightmares. I still have the issues, but, I always lean back on my agriculture and on my horticulture part. It soothes me. It refocuses me. I can have the worst day in the world, but as soon as I step my foot out my flowers, it's all erased.
2022 also marked the launch of a new NCAT resource, the Agri-Solar Clearinghouse. It's a website that connects the communities surrounding agrivoltaics, the practice of growing crops and grazing livestock among solar panels. NCAT's Energy Program Director, Stacy Peterson, has a conversation with Meg Cayley, Executive Director and co-founder of the Colorado nonprofit Sprout City Farms, in growing crops among solar panels in Colorado, the first of a series of agrivoltaic podcasts. Sprout City Farms began in 2010 with a focus on increasing food access and community resiliency by farming underused urban land. Among its partnerships, Sprout City Farms works with Jack's Solar Garden in Longmont, Colorado, growing crops in the spaces between solar panels at the site, which is now the largest agrivoltaic research facility of its kind in the United States.
Meg, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about how Sprout City Farms started farming at Jack's?
Yes, we as a nonprofit got started in the Denver metro area farming underutilized urban land, so places like schoolyards and public parks and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's a few reasons why Jack's Solar Garden fits into our mission. And the first one is because the land under solar panels is typically also underutilized.
Yes.
Is another space that we saw that we could bring a food producing oasis into that realm. So we were excited about that. We also, because we're a nonprofit, we have a big focus on education and farmer training and just being able to build up a network in whatever program we're running. So I think it's a really good space for us to be able to come in and kind of trailblaze and try to crack the nut of growing different varieties of food crops under solar panels, because no one has done that in this country at production scale. And it's really hard to convince farmers who are really watching razor thin margins. They're really watching their bottom line. If they don't know if it's going to be a profitable venture or not, how could they take the risk of, building a new operation like that with no information?
Yeah, it's wonderful that you're trailblazing and doing that work for them. What type of crops are you growing?
We this year grew, so 2021 was our first season of production, but because of construction delays with the retention pond for the irrigation system and a host of other things with construction projects, we had a partial season. We finally got water and were able to get planted in late June, early July in 2021. So we saw a partial season last year, and then 2022 was our first full season. And so in 2021, we had a little more of a scattershot approach of like, let's try to grow a sort of typical diversity of crops for us, just kind of everything from onions to tomatoes, and put them where we think that they would like to be. Uh-huh. Like we put the tomatoes in the sunniest areas, But this year we really wanted to buckle down on our partnership with the research team at University of Arizona.
Do you find that the shade from the solar panels impacts your crop yield?
That is something that we are studying. So the folks at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, did a sun and shade study, using the angle of the sun throughout the year and things like that, of how much shade is created in each production area. So essentially we have these rows of solar panels. They're about 17 feet in between them, and we can fit 3 production beds in each lane in between those rows of solar panels. And each of those 3 beds gets a different amount of sun and shade throughout the day. So the westernmost bed is the shadiest, the one in the center is the sunniest, and then the easternmost bed is shadier, but not quite as shady as the other side. So to drill down and see how well these crops would do with those varying amounts of sun and shade, we put, like, for example, tomatoes in each of the 3 beds. And as we pruned and harvested throughout the season, we tracked which yield came from which bed. So we'll know by the end of the season, when we do all our number crunching, what the difference in yield was, depending on how much sun and shade that they got. And some of the crops did as we expected, like root crops and leafy greens are cold season vegetables. They like the shade better. Yeah. So, we kind of knew going in that some of those typical colder season, shade loving crops were going to do just fine and probably have higher yields than what we see at our typical full sun fields.
When I saw Greg Baron Gafford's work down in Tucson at Biosphere in Monzo, I was so impressed with the water reduction, and it'll be really good to have a couple of years of data and be able to see how that proves out around the West. I think that has really huge implications.
Yeah, it's one of those environmental factors that, if it's true that we can use less water and also get a dual purpose from the land, get regenerative agriculture and organic food out of there, plus renewable energy, and use less water, it's just like, that is a win-win-win.
It is. I couldn't agree more. So this summer we went and we toured around, and it was very hot. It was summer, and I noticed that everyone tended to huddle underneath the solar panels, kind of like the sheep do. And we were all just trying to hide from the sun because it was just so hot. And so we started doing skin temperature tests, and we used a FLIR, and we used the infrared, and we saw about a 10-degree temperature drop on skin if you were underneath the panel. And I was wondering, do you see that at Jack's as well? And what is the implication, if so, with farm workers?
Yes, and Stacey, I'm so glad that y'all are tracking that, because it's one of these things that is a little harder, I think, to measure and do a study on, but it has huge implications for farm worker health, because there's so much heat exhaustion, that happens out in the fields. And so just my little anecdote from Jack's is that when we're planning the work plan for the day, oftentimes, especially when we have multiple people working there, we try to make a plan to work like on one side, in the morning, and on the other side in the afternoon, so that we can be in the shade, because it makes such a difference the way you feel. You have more energy throughout the whole day if you're not in the full sun. And at our elevation, there's a huge difference between the sun and the shade.
Yeah. So I'm wondering a little bit about the market value. So do you think that there's an added market value to your crops if they're grown at Jack's Solar Garden, or if a specialty crop was grown at an agri-solar site? Do you think there's an added market value for that?
I think in terms of consumer opinions and stuff like that, that'll kind of remain to be seen. But the one thing that we feel pretty good about going into next season is will have a corner on the market for out of season crops like lettuce in July. It's going to be impossible to have not bitter tasting salad greens.
Yeah, they'll all bolt.
For most farms, in the heat of the summer. So I think it's more that we'll be able to extend the season all year for those colder season vegetables and be able to distribute them when no one else really has them.
So switching gears a little, I know community building is a really important aspect of your work, and it's a really important aspect of what we do too. So I'd like to talk a little bit about ways in which you build community at Jack's and at your other Sprout City farms.
Yeah, and before I forget, because this is another reason that we wanted to partner at Jack's that I didn't mention earlier, is the farmer training side of things. So I'll start there. We have been looking for a while for a farm site that would be large enough for us to be able to allocate some land for incubator plots for aspiring, young, beginning, first generation, second career farmers. There's all these different categories that people can fall into. But basically, access to land to test out your business plan is one of the absolute biggest barriers to people entering agriculture as a career and being able to be successful once they do launch. So we've heard this from our past interns and apprentices over the years. Since we got started in 2010, we've had over 120 different new farmers work with us in our urban farms. And there's a really big jump you have to make between working for somebody for a season or two on their operation and then going and starting your own project and finding the land to be able to do it, all the capital up front that's needed to install infrastructure and get tools and set up an irrigation system and wash station and cold storage and all of these things. It's almost insurmountable when you add all of that up. And because I think it's something like 90% of the agricultural lands in this country are going to change hands in the next 20 years because of farmers retiring and not having succession plans. We really need to work on training up the next crop of farmers. What's going to happen to our food system if there's nobody stepping in, to those shoes? So we've been trying for a long time to figure out where we could have an incubator farm. And so initially we knew that we wanted to have some incubator farm plots at Jack's just for anybody who, has a few seasons of production experience and wants to go their own, but needs sort of the training wheels and some of the mentorship environment still, and access to all of the resources that we can provide because we've already set up a farm there, But now that we've worked there for a couple of seasons, we've realized that there's another group of folks that could really be served by having access to a plot to test out their business plan. And that is folks that specifically may want to build an agrivoltaics project because it's like farming in an obstacle course. It's, quite different from just an open field. So there's a lot of little quirks to the system, and we feel really strongly that if farmers want to undertake a project like this, it would really behoove them to come and work with us and see the site and get familiar with it before they go whole hog, and set something up. So I think there's a couple different groups of people that might be interested in being able to have a plot there and, kind of get going in that way. So that's sort of the farmer community side of things. And then to answer your question about just how do we connect with our communities in general, we really try to allocate a good portion of our harvest to food access programs for our local communities. So down in Denver and Lakewood, where we've had farms for over a decade now, we do 55% of our harvest is distributed to lower income households through no-cost CSA shares, where they get a weekly share of food from the farm. We supply local school cafeterias for Title I schools. We do farm stands that are using suggested pricing models, so it's sort of donation based. We just want to break down barriers to accessing healthy food for folks. So if they want to come get the food, we just want them to have it.
Great.
And then we also donate to local food pantries. So we've been starting to set that up at Jack's. We are working with some partners up there in Longmont. The Boulder County Farmers Market Group does no-cost CSA shares for folks with the Women with Infants and Children program. So that's for qualifying households. It's similar to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, which used to be called food stamps. So we are working with the Farmers Market Association to get food every week to CSA shares for WIC families. And then we also have a food pantry in Longmont called the Hour Center, where we are donating a portion of the harvest as well. So yeah, and then we do other things too beyond food access and community engagement. We do workshops and volunteer days and just events for folks to come and hang out on the farm and get to know the farmers and just kind of see their local food system in action. So as we continue to build out the programming at Jack's, we will introduce a lot more of those community event type elements too. We've had a great number of volunteers this year that have helped a lot.
Well, that'll do it for this special edition of ATTRA's Voices from the Field podcast. Thanks for tuning in. The complete episodes we featured and all the other Voices from the Field podcasts can be found at attra.ncat.org. And you don't have to worry about missing any of this year's highlights. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATTRA Voices from the Field is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agricultural Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll be back next week with a Farm Fresh New episode. And until then, keep on farming.